Programming normally seen at this time will not air, so that we may bring you the following special from Toledo 11, the news channel.
The legend lives on from the Chippewa down at the big lake they call Sugar Bay. The lake, it is said, never gives up her dead when the skies of November turn gloomy.
She was a beauty, yeah, well taken care of.
With the load of iron ore, 26,000 tons more than the Edmund Fitzgerald weighed empty.
I really didn't believe that a ship that size would sink.
As the big freighters go, it was bigger than most, with a growing good captain well seasoned.
We'll never forget our family members that did go down on it. We'll never forget them.
This is Whitefish Point in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. To the east lies Whitefish Bay. Behind me to the north, Lake Superior. 17 miles to the northwest is the final resting place of a famous lake freighter. On November 10th, 1975, the Edmund Fitzgerald went down with all hands. 29 men, fathers, sons, husbands, brothers, all lost. I'm Jeff Heitz. For the next half hour, we'll explore the mysteries and the theories behind what has become known as the legend of the Edmund Fitzgerald. She was the Edmund Fitzgerald, and when she was christened in 1958, she was the Lady of the Lake, 729 feet long. For 17 years, she set record after record, carrying iron ore from Wisconsin to Ohio. By 1975, she was also the pride of her captain, Toledo resident Ernest McSorley, a master with 44 years' experience on the water. She was a good ship with a close-knit crew. But when she left Superior, Wisconsin, November 9th, 1975, loaded with taconite pellets, no one could imagine the disaster that awaited.
Back then, I thought, nothing would happen,
Dick Bishop was a steward, a cook on the Edmund Fitzgerald, but he hadn't sailed with her for several weeks as he recovered from a ruptured esophagus. Finally, he was cleared for duty November 9th.
I'd had my bags packed and everything, and I guess maybe carrying them down the dock, something happened and I felt another pain. And when the boat got tied up and everything, I explained it to the captain. And since the relief was already there, he says, well, just take another time off and go see your doctor, which I did.
Bob Rafferty, the relief steward who was filling in during Bishop's illness, thought he'd be flying back home to Toledo on the 9th. Instead, he was making what he figured to be his last trip of the season.
In fact, he sent a most interesting card to my mother it was a picture of Lake Superior, and on the back it says, hope to see you in a couple of days, but we're never sure. And he signed it Bob. Love, Bob.
The winds of November can quickly become devastating gales, especially on the greatest of the Great Lakes. On the 9th of November, the National Weather Service was watching a storm brewing over the Oklahoma Panhandle. It moved across Kansas, then Iowa, then rapidly intensified as it headed for Marquette and Lake Superior. The Weather Service issued a gale warning. Several hours after getting underway, McSorley contacted Captain Bernie Cooper on the Anderson, and the two masters agreed to ride out the storm together. As the gale became a full-fledged storm, they changed course northward, seeking the protection of the Canadian shore.
They were so far into the lake and so far into the storm that there was no place to hide. If they turned around, they would have probably fallen into the trough of a very serious storm and caused more problems. So they were really trying to seek the shelter of Whitefish Bay behind Whitefish Point. So there was no turning around at that particular time. So this was a safe harbor to try and get to.
The afternoon of November 10th, Captain McSorley radioed to the Anderson he had topside damage and 2 vents missing. He said, I am taking on water and beginning to list. McSorley also said he'd lost both radars and asked the Anderson to assist in keeping him on course. In 16-foot seas, the Anderson's radar plotted the Fitzgerald sailing close to 6 Fathom Shoal, north of Caribou Island. And now, in addition to the howling winds, it began to snow.
I think the average during some of the height of the storm was 54 knots. The top wind speed was 96 miles an hour, and the waves were cresting at 35 feet during the worst part of the storm.
At the height of the storm, Captain McSorley radioed that both his pumps were working. They should have been more than sufficient to pump overboard any water his ship was taking on. At 7:05, the Anderson called to Fitzgerald, asking her condition. Captain Ernest McSorley said calmly, "We're holding our own. We're holding our own." It would be the last anyone would ever hear from the Edmund Fitzgerald.
Two massive waves that Captain Cooper recalls, the captain from the Arthur M. Anderson, said that these two waves went by him, damaged his lifeboats, and he figured caught up with the Fitzgerald 20 minutes later at about 7:10 when the Fitzgerald went off the radar screen.
The ship is taking waves, it's plunging into the waves at the time, and it's coming back each time because it has buoyancy forward. Once it has no buoyancy forward, when it goes into the next wave, it just starts down, and it acts like a submarine. By the time it hits the bottom of the lake, it's doing, we computed 32 miles an hour.
The legend lives on from the Chippewa down of the big lake they call Sugar Bay. Superior, they say, never gives up pretty when the gales of November come in.
Now, the Edmund Fitzgerald and her crew belonged to Lake Superior and to eternity.
I asked him how he was making out with his problem. He said he lost those vents and he had a lift, and he said he was holding his own. The last time I talked with him, he said he was holding his own, and that's the last time I lost contact after that.
The news stunned the Coast Guard and other freighter crews alike. The seemingly invincible Edmund Fitzgerald had gone straight to the bottom of Lake Superior.
We saw a flashing light off in the distance, and we went up to it, and it was a life ring light from the Fitz. Picked that up, and that's the last thing that we saw come to the surface.
The Coast Guard had ordered Captain James Hobaugh to take his cutter to the site of the sinking and begin his search. Did you know they're gone?
In my own mind, knowing a little about hypothermia and the temperature of the water and, of course, the legend of Lake Superior, we knew that if we found anyone alive, it would be a miracle.
I was on my way to work in my car about 7 o'clock the next morning of November the 11th, and the news came on my radio.
And I remember going into my mom's bedroom and telling her, and she thought, "No, you're making a mistake. You heard it wrong," or something like that.
Well, at first I thought it was just someone, playing games, because I was under medication and everything, and I didn't believe him at first,
It was, pretty devastating. Actually, then I turned on the television a couple hours later, and then it was all over the news that it was lost.
As the initial speculative reports became reality, the families began to mourn, but they weren't alone.
But if someone were lost in the Great Lakes, I tolled the Brotherhood bell in our tower, and then came into the church and had private devotions, kind of a informal requiem. And I did that morning, rang the bell 29 times.
Since the 1840s, Mariners Church in Detroit has been a sanctuary for men of the sea. It gives comfort to those born with a wandering soul, and now it gave solace to the relatives of the Edmund Fitzgerald's 29 crewmen. The men who lived, worked, and eventually died on the Fitzgerald were equally devoted to their families ashore and to their other family on board.
You know, I think that he got along very well on the water.
First mate John McCarthy from Bay Village was considered the peacemaker. Men with a problem would go to him for advice, a word of support, or just a good laugh.
Polite, liked his ice cream at night. He'd sneak in because he worked 4 to 8 and didn't have time most of the time for his dessert, so I'd give it to him. He'd come through the back and get his ice cream with me. I was always happy to see him.
He loved us very, very, very much. He had tons of friends, and anytime anybody would talk about my dad, everybody loved my dad.
Toledo Relief Steward Bob Rafferty got his pleasures from telling a joke or cooking a feast for the always hearty appetites on board ship.
He was not only just a cook, he was a chef. He liked baking, meat cutting, you know, all aspects of it. And one of the things he liked the most on the Edmund Fitzgerald was the way the kitchen was set up.
Caring, kind, try to help you out as much as he can. Like when he was home on vacations or during the winter, he was always busy doing something.
Second Assistant Engineer Russell Haskell of Millbury was the inquisitive type, always learning, always increasing his knowledge about the Fitzgerald's workings. It was knowledge about the world that 22-year-old Bruce Hudson was seeking. The North Olmsted man, who enjoyed his trombone and life in general, was a deckhand that fall on the Fitzgerald.
And he had taken some time off from college to sail. He wanted to take a little break, and some of his friends had been sailing, so he thought that would be a neat thing to do. So.
In a musty old hull in Detroit, they prayed in a maritime sailors' cathedral. The church bell chimed till it rang 29 times for each man on the Edmund Fitzgerald.
These sailors shared a common bond. Too restless for work on shore, they were most at home on the water. The lakes gave them life, and in the end, they took life away in a matter of seconds. But they died as they lived, shipmates aboard the Edmund Fitzgerald. Within a week of the accident, the Coast Guard launched a board of inquiry. The investigation would last 20 months. Meanwhile, as bits of flotsam began washing ashore, the final resting place of the Fitzgerald was pinpointed by sonar. Torn, crumpled lifeboat wreckage confirmed something else. The Edmund Fitzgerald had two 25-man life rafts aboard, two 50-man lifeboats, like this one, which was recovered several days after the sinking. The Coast Guard investigation revealed that on a good day, it could take up to 10 minutes to launch a lifeboat. On a violent night like that of November 10th, 1975, it could take as long as 30 minutes to launch a lifeboat. And as we all now realize, the crew of the Edmund Fitzgerald had merely seconds.
But let's face it, folks, if there was 30-foot waves out there, there's not a whole lot going to save anybody, you know, in a lifeboat. First things first, the Coast Guard insists we inform everyone the location of all life preservers before getting out into the lake. Today certainly be no exception.
Darrell Walton and his family have lived and worked on the Great Lakes for 3 generations. His uncle, Ralph Walton, from the Toledo area, was an oiler on the Fitzgerald.
She only had 3 cargo holds instead of 5, and less bulkheads, you know, less strength. And she did work a certain way in certain seas. She was tender in certain seas.
The cargo hold is basically divided into 3 sections, each section divided by what's known as a screen bulkhead, not a substantial watertight bulkhead. So when the Edmund Fitzgerald began to make that last fatal dive, there wasn't much to stop 26,000 tons of taconite pellets from shifting forward and merely adding to the momentum of that last fatal plunge.
If you got water into the hold, the fact that the hold was not subdivided meant the water could go anyplace.
And the board's conclusion was the cargo hold was flooded, probably because of ineffective hatch covers.
As you move forward on the ship, you found hatches were gone, but the clamps were damaged. So they'd been ripped off when the vessel hit the bottom. When you got all the way forward, we found hatches that were missing and the clamps were undamaged. Indication was that they hadn't been properly secured, for whatever reason.
Not everyone agrees. The Lake Carriers Association and other lake veterans believe the Fitzgerald sailed too close to Caribou Island and a series of shoals.
Jesse Cooper, the captain of the Anderson, said she was a lot closer to the Caribou Shoals than he would have liked to have been. Her radars were inoperative. Whitefish Point, she'd been up there. That big, beautiful light had been blown out. The wind was blowing so hard, hurricane-strength wind, that they couldn't keep the generators going if they lost electricity.
Well, I know in the storm the hatches would have been secured because Captain Fitzgerald would have done it himself if nobody else. And the shoal thing, I think with the 3 waves that they said, I believe the water could have been low enough for it to hit.
There's no disagreement that the ship nosedived straight to the bottom of Lake Superior.
Actually penetrating 25 feet of the bottom clay and then hitting bedrock and stopping. And the weight of the stern and the taconite moving forward literally collapsed about 200 feet of the center section. Then the stern flipped off upside down like that and the bow came to rest right side up.
We looked at the bottom of the stern section. There were no scrapes on the bottom of the stern section that we saw, and keep in mind, this is 75 technology.
We suggest the ship went down in one piece. We still didn't find any clues down there that would support why, any one of the theories that suggest why the ship took on water, however.
The captain wired in, he had water coming in, and the big ship and crew was in peril. And later that night when the lights went out of sight, in the wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald.
No one will ever know.
That's what I was going to ask.
No one will ever know what happened.
20 years later, the questions remain, but the legend of the Edmund Fitzgerald lives on. Whitefish Point, 1995, 20 years after the sinking of the Edmund Fitzgerald. A family member leaves behind a makeshift memorial.
This poem is still here. The picture is still there. It's undisturbed, and people are starting to add rocks to this little shrine, so to speak. It's amazing.
The last stanza reads, "A grave is a grave on land or at sea. Why can't they just let them be? Please place your flowers on the shore and please don't disturb them anymore." That was written by John Sawyering, who's the nephew of Oliver J. Buck-Champeau, a crew member.
Wishes of the family members that nobody disturbs the wreck site again. Just leave their loved ones alone.
We want all these dives stopped, and because they're just desecrating the grave site, and this has to be, we have to put an end to this.
Ensuring that the remains of the crew are left undisturbed has become a mission that's galvanized family members. Sensational tabloid-type dives on the wreckage have torn open 20-year-old wounds.
That's very hard, that I just feel they are going down and desecrating my son's gravesite and the other men, and that just is very, very hard for the families to realize that someone is going down there.
Going down there and messing with the boat would be just like going out here to a cemetery and digging the grave up.
I find them to be subhuman, because they're only out for their own, the lowest of gain, which is economic gain. And they have no real feelings for those that are left behind.
So the campaign began as the wives, mothers, and children of the men of the Edmund Fitzgerald petitioned the Canadian government to have the wreckage declared a grave site, a process still ongoing. At the same time, the families worked with the Great Lakes Shipwreck Society's museum at Whitefish Point on a dive they considered appropriate, bringing up the ship's bell and replacing it with another bearing the names of the crew.
Because the bell is a very spiritual type thing. I think you might want to, I think I might say it's spiritual in that it's the voice of the ship.
Fundraising efforts have begun to build a memorial at the museum. For the families of the Fitzgerald, it will become the grave site they've never been able to visit.
It means that, that we have a place to go now and remember our loved ones. The pain and loneliness will never go away, but we hope that, you know, this part of it can be closed and that the dives will stop.
Does anyone know where the love of God goes when the waves turn in minutes to hours? The searchers all say they to make Whitefish bid. They put 15 more miles behind her. They might have split up, or they might have capsized. They may have broke even to water. And all that remains is the faces and the names of the wives and the sons and the daughters.
Well, I've thought of them every day, almost, you know, but
It's come to pass in my own heart that it doesn't really matter how it happened. It just happened. And we'll never know.
We'll never know for certain why the Edmund Fitzgerald went down that violent night. The secret will remain forever entombed with the ship and her crew of 29. But as long as our memories live on, as long as there are places to visit like the Shipwreck Museum, then the legend of the Edmund Fitzgerald will survive. Along the shipwrecked coast of the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, I'm Jeff Heitz. Good night.
The legend lives on from the triple down of the big lake they call Peninsula. Superior